Welcome back to another video, this time a Linux distribution, or in this case, a different edition video. Now, I guess the only Linux distribution review I've done on this channel so far has been for the Solus 4.3 KDE Plasma Edition. Now, what I'm doing in this one here is using what they would call the mainline Budgie Edition, as it were, which may or may not exactly be the mainline edition anymore per se. That they probably treat all four equally. But I want to go ahead and talk a little bit about that. And basically, one of the things I'd like to do on this channel is just try out not only different Linux distributions, but also possibly the different editions within them. So there's basically four types of editions for Solus Linux. And so I didn't spend a lot of time on the KDE Plasma Edition, and that's probably, or when I say probably, it is because I'd already been using KDE for quite a while by the time I jumped over to the Solus version. So I have been using Kubuntu, I think probably about a month and a half or so prior to using the Solus version of KDE. So really all I needed to focus on was some of the big differences between those two. Well, jumping over to the Budgie Edition, it's obviously a completely different desktop environment, and there's a lot to talk about that's completely different. And so I wanted to give it a little more of a thorough review than, say, just 2 weeks. And not only that, but I wanted to just use it for a fairly long period of time, in this case, 2 months. And so this is my review of the Budgie Edition of Solus after a full 2 months of using it. Now, I would have had this up a little bit sooner, but, work and things of that nature kind of, took away from my time for making videos. But I'm back now, so I'm going to do the Budgie update or Budgie review video, and then we can get back to hopefully a more regular schedule of videos again. So let me go ahead and start this video off by addressing probably the biggest elephant in the room as far as Solus Linux is concerned, and possibly even the Budgie Desktop environment for those who perhaps have a different distribution they prefer to use, but they were kind of interested in the Budgie Desktop. If you don't follow Linux news as much as I do, you may not even know this, but for those who do have some sort of following in the Linux news, think about a month and a half ago, roughly, the team lead for the Solus project stepped down. And so there's a lot of people thinking the Solus project is basically, it's over with, it's dead and done. Well, it's not. So the original team lead, Josh Strobel, and actually, from what I've learned, he's not really the original team lead. He just was a team lead for Solus when I jumped on board trying it out. He is also the lead designer for the Budgie Desktop environment. And so I have been getting fairly regular updates pretty much every week for the most part. And so I want to, I guess, alleviate any fears you may have heard if you've heard of this and you thought it may be an issue and the project's dead in the water. At this point in time, it's not dead in the water. It's still going strong. And in my opinion, I think it's probably could be a good thing in the long run, where you have the Solus team that'll just focus on the actual distribution itself, and Josh and his team will focus on the Budgie Desktop environment and get some much needed improvements to the desktop environment. I don't want to make it sound like I'm throwing shade at Budgie, because I'm not. It's actually a pretty good desktop environment, but there are some things that I think do need to be ironed out. And he's also in the process of trying to get it off the GTK tool set, which runs a lot of desktop environments on Linux, because the GNOME team is kind of they have their goals and their vision for their desktop environment, and it doesn't always align with what other teams want to do with theirs. So his plan is to eventually get it off of the GTK and go to the EFL, or Enlightenment Foundation libraries. And it will be interesting to see how that goes in the months and probably years to come to basically get off of that toolkit. So it'll be a good thing to watch as things go by. And I think with him being able to focus his time on specifically just Budgie, it will probably help him out quite a bit. And like I said, the Solus team will just focus on the distribution and keep making it the best it can be. So at this point in time, I don't think it's something to worry about. It's just keep an open mind and just continue to watch as the distribution comes along. So with that said, let me go ahead and pull up this NeoFetch window or terminal window with me running the NeoFetch program. And so you can see here that even as of this weekend when I did my updates, they're still running kernel 5.14. So they're a little bit slow on the kernel. Faster than, say, an Ubuntu-based distribution, especially a long-term service one, or a Debian-based distribution or something like that. But it's definitely not the fastest when it comes to getting those kernel updates out. So that's definitely something to keep in mind. I do hope probably within the next couple of weeks, hopefully we'll be on a 5.15 kernel. But so far they have been lagging a little bit behind there. But yeah, you can see here the desktop environment is Budgie, and the window manager is Mutter, which I believe is the same window manager that is used in the GNOME desktop environment. And this is just some more system specs that are for my specific system, in case you're wondering what it is that I'm running currently here at my house. So there you go. And it even tells you how many packages I've got installed. EOPKG being the package management tool that Solus uses, and I have some Flatpaks installed as well. Now I want to go ahead and start with basically the positives and just kind of give a bit of an overview of the Budgie Desktop environment. So for me, one of the biggest positives I can say for using this edition of Solus compared to, say, the KDE Plasma edition is I didn't get that black screen with the flashing cursor in the top left corner like I did under the KDE version, or even Kubuntu for that matter. Everything just worked straight out of the box, and I didn't have any issues at all with the X server ever coming up online. So that was it was a good thing. Now, I could be mistaken what was being run, but I believe they're probably using the open source Nouveau driver for NVIDIA, or maybe just a generalized VGA driver. I really don't know which one they were using, but when I first installed it, you could definitely see that it was a little bit sluggish, and a lot of this snappiness, even just on the desktop environment, wasn't there, but it worked, and that's fine. So I was able to basically update the system, reboot everything, and I used this driver management to install the NVIDIA graphics driver, the proprietary driver. So, and if you're using an NVIDIA graphics card, you're going to want to install that driver. And when I did it, it also installed all the 32-bit libraries. It integrated very well with everything. And I guess the reason why I bring this up is because I didn't use the driver management program before because of that black screen with the flashing cursor that I got under the KDE version. So at this point, I think that may be an issue with KDE itself and not so much Solus, but because like I said, I've had it happen on not only Solus but also Kubuntu, so it does kind of seem to lend itself to a possible issue with NVIDIA cards and KDE sometimes having issues. So that is a possibility and something to keep in mind. But that was not a problem at all with Budgie, which is good. Now, the Budgie theming is a little bit different, as it were. So with KDE, you could go in there and just download themes or whatnot, or just use the default themes in KDE, and I thought they worked pretty good. But with Budgie, the best way to get the themes is to basically go into the Software Center. I think you can just do a search for -theme. Yeah, and they'll bring up a lot of different themes that you could try to install. And that's the recommended way of doing theming in Budgie. And one of the reasons I say that is because you see here that I'm using the Vimix Dark Ruby theme. And that's the one I ended up choosing because I think it had the best mix of dark theming, but it wasn't so dark that I couldn't see everything. So let me see if I can give you a comparison to basically what the standard dark theme is for Budgie. It's this one right here, Plata Noir. So this theme itself is just a little bit too dark, and after a while it's just one of those things that it didn't sit well with me. So I swapped over to this theme because it was just a lot easier to read, especially when dealing with stuff like PDF files. And so there are a lot of themes that you can get in the Software Center itself. And I guess this would be kind of a negative, is you just don't have a lot of, examples that you can look at and kind of compare and say, hey, what does this theme look like compared to, say, the other ones? And so the only choice I had was to go about and install all of them. So it's both a pro and a con. I mean, I think the themes that they have installed in their Software Center, they work really well. They really do. And there's a lot of different themes there to basically fit pretty much anybody's preference, I believe. But it is something to keep in mind, is that there's not a very good preview function for it. And another thing I would say about this is this Software Center, I guess you hit the X there. Okay, this Software Center is the same across all 4 editions of Solus Linux. And I would consider that a positive as well, because if you get used to using the Software Center here, and then you decide you want to try a different edition like I've done, you'll still have that familiarity of the same Software Center across all of them. Now, which, if you like using the KDE Discover, for instance, that may be something you don't like because KDE Discover is basically disabled. But I think it does give a sense of continuity between the 4 editions, and that's a good thing in my book. And to be honest, the Software Center, whereas it's not the greatest Software Center around, it's still very functional and it works very, very well. I know a lot of people mention stuff like Synaptic Package Manager and things of that nature. I'm not a big fan of Synaptic, and I just think that the way this Software Center is set up is not the greatest, but it works, and it works really well. I mean, I don't want to make it sound like it's not good, because it is good. It's just there are certain other Software Centers that just do things better. And I think that's something the team does know about, and they're probably still working on trying to improve the Software Center. And I'm sure they'll get to it soon, sooner rather than later. Though, now that I am on the topic of the Software Center, there is one issue that I do have to point out. If you use Flatpaks, the Software Center does not update any of your Flatpak packages. So for you to do that, you need to open up a terminal and run Flatpak update. Once again, that's probably one of the things that there are other Software Centers that do better, is they'll update Flatpak programs as well as your standard repository-based programs. So that's definitely a shortcoming of the Software Center, and something to keep in mind if you do use a lot of Flatpaks. I think I have, it said that I think I have like 12 installed, but that's because it's, the actual Flatpak and then some dependencies. So the majority, I don't have a lot of Flatpaks installed. In fact, I can't even really think of anything major, possibly Zoom, because I did have Zoom installed, and that was a Flatpak program. But for the most part, I try to stick to the things that are in the repository itself. So I haven't really had to use too many Flatpaks, to be fair. And the Flatpaks that I did use, I only used them because they weren't available at all in the Solus Center. So very few programs have I had to go and rely on the Flatpak. And one thing I will say as far as a gaming perspective, I didn't really use a lot of Wine programs this time around while I've had this version of Solus installed. So I didn't really get a good chance to test out Wine, but I did notice that the Wine version kept getting updated pretty frequently. In fact, that was one thing that I believe was updated probably in this last go around here this weekend. Yeah, they have Wine 7.3. So if you do use a lot of Wine programs, the Wine package is kept pretty much up to date on a fairly regular basis. So, yeah, there are certain things that they do lag a little bit behind on. For instance, the kernel. But there's other things like Wine that they are always getting the updates out on a pretty quick basis. Probably not as fast as, say, Arch, but they do come out very quickly. Definitely quicker than you would get on an Ubuntu or Debian-based distribution, for instance. So I think that's enough talking about the Software Center. Here's the Budgie Desktop settings, and one thing you'll notice is there's not a huge amount of customization for the Budgie Desktop settings, which, depending on your outlook, could be a good or a bad thing. I think the personalization that they do have here is probably just enough. And, like here, I turned on desktop icons. And because I do like desktop icons, and you can add virtual desktops if you do like using a lot of virtual desktops. Personally, I'm not a big fan of them. That's just my own personal preference. But if you like virtual desktops, you can add a whole bunch of them here. Raven is this panel here on the side. And it's a pretty decent panel. I do like it. You can just click on it and you see here, I haven't really modified this at all, really. You can see here it's got the calendar by default. It's got the sound output stuff here. And you get your notifications that'll show up here, which I obviously don't have anything right now. But yes, you can modify what is and was not in the Raven panel. Go ahead and hide that real quick. So that's pretty cool. I didn't really mess with it a lot, though, to be honest with you. So that's pretty much a default Raven panel. Here's some Windows settings. And you can actually add panels here, or the bottom panel is already there. You can add extra panels. So like if you like the old school where you have a bottom and a top panel, you can add a brand new panel and tell exactly what you want on it. Personally, I'm a big fan of just having the one single bottom panel, so I just pretty much left it the way it was. But you can actually change your position. I can put it on the top if you want it on the top, or some places put it on the left, which I think is just really weird, but that's just me. And then I just leave it on the bottom. And here's I guess one of the things I do want to talk about a little bit about Budgie itself. In its current form, Budgie is very heavily integrated in with a lot of GNOME apps. And so probably one of the things that I guess I wasn't a big fan of is the fact that it didn't have a wallpaper or slideshow program built into the desktop environment itself. And so Variety is the wallpaper changer that I installed to do that functionality. And it does work really good. I do like Variety. Variety is a very good, it says wallpaper changer, but I like to use the word slideshow better. But anyway, it's a very effective slideshow program, and it works great. But if you want something that's integrated into the desktop environment, that's something you won't get because GNOME apparently is not very big on stuff like theming and whatnot. I don't know. I'm going to play with GNOME eventually, or GNOME, sorry. I will play with it eventually, and I'll come up with a better opinion of GNOME, but for now that's just what I've heard in the background. So a lot of GNOME programs are installed by default in this desktop environment, in this specific version of Solus, for better or for worse. And I think in some instances that's be a for worse. I personally did not like the PDF viewer. They have the events or events. I'm not exactly sure how to pronounce it, but the PDF viewer they had installed by default was just really not very good, especially coming from KDE. The Ocular PDF viewer is so much better. But I did try to avoid installing any Qt programs and trying to keep it a pure GTK environment for now, just to kind of stay on the same toolkit, as it were. So what I was able to install, I think that'd be under Office. No. Yes, it is. I installed the Actual Document Viewer, which is basically something you'll find in the Mate desktop environment. And this one actually worked really well for me. So I did like the Actual PDF Viewer, and apparently you can even read EPUBs and stuff with it. So this one's a good alternative to the events, and I think it does compare pretty favorably to Ocular. So that's something to keep in mind. Some of the GNOME programs themselves aren't the greatest. You know, at first I wasn't a big fan of the Nautilus. I believe this is Nautilus. The Nautilus file explorer, for lack of a better word. But, you know, the more I used it, the more it grew on me, and I started to like it. And, you know, you can click this other locations, and you can see, you know, different drive sizes and whatnot. So it definitely does grow on you a little bit, for sure. And I think it does work. Is it as good as the Dolphin Manager? I don't know. I think they're comparable. I really do. I like Dolphin a lot. But like I said, this one, it was different, but it wasn't, you know, so different that I just hated it. The way I did the PDF program, for instance. I couldn't stand that thing. That thing had to go like within the first week of me using the Budgie Desktop environment. But Nautilus works pretty well. One program I did install that was pretty important for a lot of stuff that I do is the Pulse Audio Volume Control, and I definitely recommend that. You know, I don't know if VLC was installed. You know what? I do remember, actually. VLC was not installed by default. They had a different media player or video player. I'm drawing a bit of a blank on it, but I believe it was called, what was it called? I think it was called like MPV or something. Like, yeah, MPV. This was what was installed by default, and I wasn't a big fan of it, so I went ahead and installed VLC, which is just a better video program, at least in my opinion. And here's one thing you can tell. I have obviously customized my taskbar, and I've put my preferred web browser, which is Brave. I love the Brave web browser now, and that's my favorite web browser. I put VLC down in there. Now the Rhythmbox music player, that was installed by default, and you know, it works good. I don't have any complaints as far as that's concerned, but I mean, you'd have to have a pretty bad music player for me to dislike it, because all I need to do is play music. So it doesn't need to be super fancy or anything. And I know there's a whole bunch of different music players out there you could try, but yeah, Rhythmbox works just fine, so I don't have any issues with that one. And when it came to gaming, you see I have Steam and RetroArch here on the desktop, and that's really the only two programs I used over the last 2 months. Not because I didn't want to try anything else out. I actually did try out, what was it, Lutris? Yeah, I tried out Lutris, and I did link it to my GOG account, and it does look like something I would definitely be interested in trying out. One of the things it lets you do is it lets you use, say, the wine that's on your system, or it also has Proton packages you can use just like Steam. So that's really neat, and hopefully I'll get around to giving that a try eventually. I just haven't done it yet. But Lutris looks to be a pretty good launcher, probably probably a little bit better than say the Mini Galaxy, because Mini Galaxy I think is just for GOG, whereas Lutris I believe allows you to link to a bunch of different stores like Origin, Epic Game Store, and things of that nature, which I don't have anything on, so I can't really speak to those platforms. But you know, Steam Steam is kind of the great equalizer amongst most Linux distributions now, because if you use the Proton that's in Steam, it doesn't really matter what wine you're running. And so I can definitely say from a gaming perspective, Steam worked great, RetroArch worked great, and well, I mean, you saw my gameplay for both the BioShock games. It worked almost flawlessly, I would say, for both of them, and it worked really well. Now, speaking of the desktop icons, that is another nitpick, I would say, of the Budgie Desktop environment I point out. And this may be something that is going to be fixed soon. I believe they say this is Budgie 1.5.3, I believe. There's the desktop settings. I'm not really sure how to, well, I guess I could do a NeoFetch. But apparently they literally just dropped an update to Budgie like today, or like within the last few days. So the Budgie 1.6 is out, and it may fix some of these issues. But as you can tell, I got these desktop icons, and they're all here on the left, and you can't move them. And so I did a little bit of searching, and that was an issue that is known with this version of Budgie. And unlike KDE, the Budgie updates, there just weren't any updates other than my initial updates when I first installed the desktop environment. So this bug has been sitting here the whole time I've been using this edition of Solus, and it's there. I mean, I could get rid of the desktop icons, but I figure that's fine. That's all I'm going to put on the desktop. I don't like a lot of icons. In fact, there was someone I was working with here recently. I saw his desktop, and it was like icons everywhere, and that just hurt my soul a little bit. But so I wasn't too upset with just having this few amount of desktop icons. So it works, but it's definitely a bug that does need to be brought up, and hopefully something they are able to fix soon. And they may have fixed it in the latest version of Budgie, which literally just dropped. But a lot of distributions, in fact, probably most, if not all, the distributions don't have the latest version of Budgie on them yet. They may get it here in Solus pretty soon, but I'll probably have jumped to a different edition by then before I have a chance to give it a try. The start and shutdown button is over here in the bottom right, which is kind of neat, but it's one of those things that does take a little bit of getting used to. But yeah, that's where you can shut down or restart your computer if you need to do so. Trying to think here. What else? If you're not interested in, say, a wallpaper changer, you can just go here to the settings menu, and it takes you straight to the background. And these are all built-in backgrounds in the Solus distribution. In fact, this one that I have up here right now happens to be the default background. So I just wanted to go ahead and leave that up. But yeah, you have all sorts of different settings here. But it's kind of weird how they have the settings divided. So you notice there's the Budgie Desktop settings, and that's where you would think most of your desktop environment settings would be located. But actually, a lot of them are here in the system settings area. The displays one, for instance, for me, is a pretty big one because I have my monitor and my TV, and I like to have them mirrored together. And there's also this nightlight setting, which I gave it a try, but wasn't a big fan of it. After a while, it does make the screen. Well, it says right here, makes the screen color warmer at night, and I don't know. It just wasn't a big fan of it. But if you do like the nightlight feature, that's where you'd find it. And all of these settings, pretty much everything that's under the system settings menu location, is going to be here in this area. And there's some certain things there that you just think would fall under, say, the Budgie Desktop settings, but it just doesn't. But yeah, here you have basically pretty much everything. Like I believe power, like you could do, how long you want your screen to stay on before it turns off and things of that nature. So anyway, trying to think if there's anything else I can truly talk about the Budgie Desktop environment. This is basically what you see here is what you get. I wouldn't call it super minimalistic, but it doesn't have the overwhelming amount of options that you get in, say, KDE, and from what I've been told, possibly XFCE as well. So there's not a huge amount of options, but as far as a GNOME or GTK based desktop goes, it works. I mean, and if you like the, for lack of a better word, the Windows style of desktop, it's very familiar, and you can just basically adjust to it very easily, which a lot of us, that's kind of what we want. We just want something we can adjust to very simply without a lot of having to relearn the ropes. And, I forget what the setting was, but there's one of them where if you want to do it like Mac OS, for instance, I think it's under here, under desktop. No, maybe it's bottom panel here. I think you can set it so this is a centered kind of thing. Oh, here, dock mode. You can turn on dock mode. There you go. So if you want it to be more like Mac OS, you can turn that dock mode on. Well, I don't mess with Mac OS, and I don't want it, so I don't need it. But I like it. It works very well. I think it's still has a little bit of a ways to go. I'm comparing it to KDE. I think KDE is just a more full-featured desktop environment, but I will say that I am interested to see what sort of changes will come down for the Budgie Desktop environment over the next year or so as they do, obviously get updates on it and also transition to that EFL toolkit. So that'd be very interesting to see what sort of changes get made to the Budgie Desktop environment. It's not my favorite right now, but it's far from being what I would say is not a good desktop environment. So it's definitely a good desktop environment. And I think that Linux is still at the point now where a lot of programs still by default are kind of written for GTK because it's just been pretty much the standard for so long. And there's actually many different desktop environments based off the GTK toolkit, not just GNOME. You also have Budgie, Cinnamon, Mate. Speaking of which, that's basically what I'm going to try out next. Is I'm going to jump over and give the Mate version of Solus a try for 2 months and see how I feel about it. But in the meantime, for this 2-month period of me using the Budgie Desktop environment, I'd say it works great. It just gets out of the way and lets you do everything you want to. Now, Solus as a gaming platform, I still think it works really well. It is, hopefully they do eventually come out with a newer version of the kernel, because I've been stuck on 5.14 probably the entire time I've run this desktop environment. It hasn't really updated at all, but I'm not going to throw stones too much there, because I believe a lot of that had to do with the fact that the team was in a bit of a shakeup around this time period. So I do believe that probably pretty soon things are going to kind of get back into a normal rhythm, and so we may start getting those regular kernel updates more regularly. That's kind of redundant me saying it that way, but uh, that's about really the only thing I've been noticing is the fact that the kernel has been very slow to come out. But other than that, the desktop environment works very well, and with the exception of some of those GNOME programs that were just kind of atrocious, I can't stress to you how much I hated that events PDF viewer. Absolutely hated it. It was that bad. But other than that, I'd say the majority of the default programs that came with this, with the exception of the PDF viewer and MPV, which I replaced with VLC, majority of the programs work pretty well. I mean, I use the Brave browser over Firefox, but Firefox is there, and if you like Firefox, it's functional. It works. So yeah, that's my review. I'd say, oh, you know what? I don't know if I gave the KDE version a score, but you know what? I'd say this one's probably about an 85 percentile score. I'm not going to give it a star. I'm just going to give it a percentile, 85%. It's good. It's good. It's usable. It's familiar for Windows users, but you can tell there's definitely some things that still need to be ironed out, and I'm hopeful that they will be ironed out, and you're going to start seeing a lot of the improvements start to come through here very soon. And Solus, as an actual Linux distribution, it still works good, and not everything is fully up to date, like on a super fast basis, but what is there and the updates I've gotten, I've never had anything break on my system where I had to reinstall or do anything like that, other than just me trying to reinstall because I want to try out a different distribution and start from a clean slate. Other than that, this works very good, and it'll be very familiar to people who are coming from a Windows based environment. And if you like to tinker with it and things of that nature, there's a little bit of tinkering, not a lot, but I think there's just enough tinkering that you can get in there and play with it and make it your own, and make it what you want to use with. As a daily driver, it works great. So that's basically my thoughts. Thank you for watching this video. See y'all in the next one. Take care.